So I just wanted to take a second and thank you guys for the opportunity. Ella, thanks for coordinating all of this and inviting us to give this presentation to the Entrepreneurship Club. So I'll present myself. My name is Jordan Furfaro. I am a, I guess, mid-level associate at BLG, which is Borden Ladner Gervais. To give you some background on myself, I grew up in Montreal in the West Island. I went to Lower Canada College, as did Ella, and that's how we were put in touch through the LCC alumni group. And I then went to Marianopolis as well. I was in commerce. Following my studies there, I went to John Molson School of Business, where I did a finance degree, and then I went to Université de Montréal, where I studied law, and all that before ultimately becoming a lawyer. And we'll go through the process on exactly how it works and what it takes to become a lawyer. And then I'll let my colleague present herself.
Yes. Hi, I'm Qian. I went to Marianopolis as well. Before that, I went to Collège Jean Eudes in the Montreal East Side. I was in honors commerce at Marianopolis, graduated in 2017, and then I went to McGill in law. I'm finishing my law degree at the end of this year in December. And I'm currently working at the BLG Borden Ladner Gervais as a student. So like we get the opportunity to work during the summer and then during the school year if we want. We'll go more in detail on that later on. So that's our bio. There's a lot going on, but like we won't go into the details as much.
I'd also like to make a comment on our attire. I know it's probably wasn't expected. I mean, typically we would be wearing full suits, but given the quarantine COVID situation, we figured we'd permit ourselves to be a little more relaxed today, given that we're not meeting any clients or anything. So forgive the appearance if wasn't quite what you were expecting.
So So we'll divide today's presentation into two parts. So in the first part, we just wanted to go over what we do, what's the legal world in very simplified terms, how to become a lawyer, what the corporate lawyers do, and who are the big players in the legal ecosystem at the moment. And then Jordan will delve further into the business side of the law, so the merger between entrepreneurship and law, both within the firm, outside the firm, and also as a non-lawyer. So some people graduate with a law degree without deciding to practice law at the end of graduating. So we'll mention some cases that we heard of and opportunities that you can think of. And we'll end today's presentation with the question period. So in general, there's no typical path, but today's presentation will talk more about how it works to become a corporate lawyer. We'll talk about something specific to corporate law, which is what we call in Montreal the course au stage. In Toronto, they call it the OCI, which is kind of similar, but different timelines. So to become a lawyer, normally you have to go to law school. There's a lot of different law schools in Quebec. We can think of McGill, UDM, University of Sherbrooke, University of Ottawa, UQAM, and there's also one in Quebec City. It normally takes 3 to 4 years, normally 3 years, but McGill has this joint degree that combines common law and civil law. This is two types of law that you don't really hear of before law school. If you have, you're really great. You know a lot about the subject. So common law normally is more the English system, so it comes from England, and the rest of Canada and the US normally follows that system. Australia also, and a lot of other countries. And then there's civil law, which follows France, which will. The countries that follow the civil system have a civil code. So Quebec has a civil code. So Quebec is really, it stands out from the rest of Canada. It follows the civil system, while the rest of Canada follows the common law system. Australia also, McGill was like, why not study both? We'll combine both and do it in three and a half years. So in a lot of other countries, an exception. And then the civil. So normally you will go to law school, and then when you graduate, you'll go to bar school. And bar school is kind of, if you heard of CPA or CFA, it's kind of the same thing but for law students. And it takes normally 4 to 8 months. You can choose if you want a condensed version, which is 4 months, or you can take a longer time to study for it, which will be 8 months. And at the end of the bar school, you have like an exam, and if you pass it, you'll go to what's called articling. Articling is a word for kind of like internship in the legal world, where you have the option to article in a law firm, like at Boyden Ladner Gervais, or you can go on and clerk at the Supreme Court, or you can go in-house. There's a lot of opportunity in how you can do your articling, which is 6 months, but you have to do it to become a lawyer. And once you finish the articling, you'll then be what's the word to like?
Sworn in.
You're sworn in, yeah. You'll be sworn in to become a lawyer.
So just a little bit more on the articling. Articling is basically that your first 6 months after you pass the bar, you're under the supervision of a practicing lawyer. So every articling student is assigned, kind of a maître de stage is what it's called. So the French term for articling is a stage. So in Montreal, you'll often hear the word stage or I'm doing my stage. And as Qian mentioned, there's pretty much a ton of opportunities available to you in terms of doing your articling, whether it be with a sole practitioner lawyer, a small boutique firm, a large national firm. There's a number of opportunities, different fields. But as Qian mentioned, it's absolutely not required in order to get sworn in and become a lawyer.
And then we just wanted to talk more about like where law students come from before law school, because we wrote it's a typical path, but there's no really typical path for like law students and how to become a lawyer. A lot of people come from different backgrounds. For example, I went to McGill, and I remember very well in my first year, there was a lot of very exceptional people. There was a girl who I think practiced medicine. She was a doctor for a while, and then she came back to law school to study law. So for us, it was like, why would you do such a long path to come back and study again? There's a lot of people with multiple masters, PhD. There's people with some science background who was in the business field and then came back to study. And there's also people like me who came from CJEP and don't have much like real world experience compared to them, but we're pitching the same at the same school, so you get to learn a lot from others who have different pathways and background than you.
I think one of the most unique things about Quebec is that our system allows people to follow the legal career path from a much earlier age than other jurisdictions would. So typically in other countries or in the rest of Canada even, before you go to law school, you would actually do a bachelor's degree first. So by the time you get to law school, you're 23 years old. But in Quebec, we're one of the only places where we can actually have lawyers that are 23 years old if they go straight to law school from CJEP. So I think that's quite unique to the practice in Quebec.
Yeah, and I just wanted to talk about if it's an opportunity to work in a firm or in the legal field before really passing your bar school and then wait for the articling to really try different fields. I got the opportunity to work at BLG. I went through what's called a course au stage, which I'll talk about a bit more in the next slide. So there's opportunities to work in the legal field during your law school.
Yeah, and to give you an example of myself, I worked at a small litigation boutique law firm throughout the school year, and in the summers when I was a law student in my first and second year of law. And I think it's a great opportunity if ever you're able to do so, to get some experience before doing course au stage, because as we're about to mention, the course au stage process is also something very unique to Quebec and also very unique to the legal industry. I think probably the most similar recruitment process is maybe the accounting field, which has kind of a similar approach. But I would say the coastal stage is very unique, and I think Qian will explain to you why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like we talked, like the example of accounting, where they also have cocktails. Like we have like recruitment events, and then like for us, what's more special is that all the firms and companies who signed the coastal stage agreement agreed to have their interviews at the same time in the same period. They follow the same timeline. So that's very unique, where a lot of big players in the legal world in Quebec will agree to have that same timeline. So the timeline is somewhat similar to what's on the screen right now. So normally you have recruitment events beginning in November. It starts slowly, and then it ends in February. So normally it's what you're used to, cocktails, just conferences on specific subject that the firm is more accustomed to, and there's open houses, so you get to visit what the firm is like. You get to meet a lot of the lawyers from the firms. There's also dinners, like there's special events that different firms will choose to do over others. So that's a bit spread out from November to February. So you get to choose your time wisely and decide if you want to go to all of the events, or to specific ones that it's more targeted. And then at the beginning of February, it's where your application for specific firms, that's the deadline. So the application is normally a CV, a cover letter, and then your grades. Other firms can ask for like your courses or other stuff that is more specific, but generally it's those three elements. And then after that, there's a blackout, which I find very particular to coastal stage, where you cannot talk to lawyers, to anyone from the firms you apply to from February to March, from the deadline of the application to the beginning of the interviews. But during the blackout, you can receive calls to know if you got an interview or not. And then in March, I believe it's mid-March normally, there begins a 2-week interview process. So the process is a 3-step process in general. You have a first interview at the firm, and then if you did well, you get a second one. And some firms like BLG, I got my second interview, not as a very formal one, but mine was really interesting. I got to go to Ritz for afternoon tea, and that was my interview. Some people got like a breakfast or a dinner or a coffee chat. So it was very, like, the second interview, I think, was more casual. It was very to know you, not as like competence, but you as a person. So the firm and the interviewers will delve like deeper into you as a person. And then there's the final dinner where all potential candidates will come join, and that will be normally the last selection point. And then
I think before we get to the summer job,
yeah,
is that what you're about to start?
Yeah,
okay.
You do want that.
I just want to, I want to give you the opportunity to really visualize what this process is like, because I think it's extremely important, and I think it's very, I think you can learn so much from this spot. And I know we're way ahead of the game. I know a lot of people on this video conference looking at this will most likely, maybe not most likely, but likely not go down this path. But if this does interest you and it is a path you want to pursue, I think it's important for you to understand what this process is like. So first of all, the coastal stage is a process where corporate law firms agree to do a recruitment process together, jointly at the same time. So if criminal law is something that you're interested in, you would not do the coastal stage. Because when you're a law student, maybe we'll back up a little bit too, in your first year of law, you're not eligible for the coastal stage, okay? You become eligible for the coastal stage in your second year of law school, and then you're also eligible in the third year of law school. So as I mentioned, if you're interested in working in a large firm, this is the process you have to go through. There's no other process. This is the only way you can get a stage in a law firm and then hope to eventually become a lawyer in a law firm. That being said, lateral movements obviously exist, but as a student, this is the only way. So to visualize what the process is like, okay? You're in a classroom with all your friends, your application deadlines are due, everybody works extremely hard to go through all the recruitment events, all the cocktails, to get to know each and every firm as much as they can, to meet as many lawyers as they can, and really ask all the questions that they have, because ultimately this is, you know, your future employer. So picking a law firm is extremely important. You want it to resemble the values that you have, et cetera, et cetera. And there's plenty of opportunity to do that through the cocktails and other events, recruitment events. Now, you apply to, you make your applications, and keep in mind, you're going to be applying to, it can be 5 law firms, 10 law firms, 15 law firms. So you're going to be preparing 15 different cover letters for 15 different law firms, and all of this is going to be due on the same day. So leading, and don't forget, you're still in school at the same time, okay? And you still have midterms coming up. So you're going through all this, then you apply. You reach the deadline. And then it's the blackout period, as Qian mentioned, where you have absolutely no contact with the law firms or any lawyers within the law firms until calls come in. Now, because of an existing agreement between all of the law firms with the exact precise timeline on when they're allowed to accept applications, when they're allowed to make phone calls, typically this all happens for all the law firms at the same time. So on a Monday morning, you'll be in class at 9:30 a.m. In law school, and you're going to see around you in your classroom that a bunch of people are going to start getting phone calls. And I'm just like, I know I'm going into, you know, way off into left field, but I think it's really interesting to understand what this is like. You're in class, you're listening to the teacher, and all of a sudden, you know, a student 2 seats next to you starts getting a call, and he doesn't recognize the number, and he knows it's most likely a law firm. So he runs out of the class to answer the phone call because he doesn't want to miss the phone call who's, you know, from a large firm who's about to give him an interview. And so that happens over the course of a week, where it's just a very intense period of time where, you know, everybody's hoping and praying to get these calls from their law firms, and so that the confirming that they have interviews. And then, as Ken mentioned, the process goes on once interviews start. You know, you go through the first round, the second round, the third round, and obviously the numbers drop as you go. So to give you an idea, BLG interviews about 120 students in first interviews. That number drops to about 50 in second interviews. And then the final dinner has about 20 to 25 candidates in the hopes of making offers and recruiting, let's say, about 10 to 12 on average. So just to give you a sense, we receive about 400, 450 applications every year. So you go from 450 applications down to about 10 to 12 offers. And that's on average per law firm. Some it could be 2 or 3, some it could be 15.
Yeah. And then once you get the opportunity to work at a law firm, they're generally 2 big groups. So we usually have this preconception that all lawyers go to court. We watch the suits, and Harvey kind of does everything. But in general, there's the litigation lawyers that go to court, and they don't always go to court. Sometimes they will happen to settle before going to court, and most of the cases, preferably, will do that. And there's the other big group is corporate commercial. So that's when, before things go bad, so you try to make the deals go well, you draft contracts, you sign deals, and you just make sure that everything will not lead to anything that will eventually go to court. So those are generally the 2 big ones. And for sure, there's other types of, like, for example, tax lawyers, IP lawyers, and other type of groups. And there's different kinds of industries and practice areas that are listed here. For example, like a growing group recently has been like arbitration, international arbitration, and a lot of people I know want to pursue that. There's also IP. Privacy is also a big group at BLG, privacy and data security. Cannabis law has been a growing concern in the country since the legalization. And Aboriginal law has also been like part of a lot of bills that might concern Aboriginal lands and those conceptions. Is there anything you want to talk about?
No, so I think you said it well. I mean, essentially, a law firm has, these are just examples of the different practice groups that you're in, and a lot of people have this kind of preconceived notion that a lawyer, kind of knows everything, and I can, I'll take myself an example. I often have friends calling me, with questions about their rent disputes with their landlords or the tickets that they received and stuff like that. But the reality is that I'm, a transactional lawyer. So my specialty is mergers and acquisitions, which is listed on this slide, and corporate finance as well. So the other areas of law are really not my specialty at all. And in fact, I probably don't know all that much about those areas at all. And so I always find it interesting that, to see that a lot of people have this idea that, okay, well, he's a lawyer, he must know all of the laws, and that's just not how it works. And so I think that's what makes it interesting for a law firm, of our size and with such a wide variety of practice areas and industries, is that you really do become an expert in each one of these areas, right? So, and the beauty of working in a team like this is that if ever you have questions, if I ever have questions about cannabis law, well, we always have, those experts within the firm that have the knowledge that, I can kind of leverage for the benefit of my clients. So just to give you some background on the firm, so BLG is actually the largest and oldest law firm in Canada. Saying goes that we're the first law firm, and we actually are so old that we set up the Bank of Montreal, which is the first bank in Canada. That's not true. The bank was around before the law firm was, but just to show you that we have almost 200 years of history, so it goes back quite a while. And obviously, it's not under the BLG banner that the firm has been around for 200 years. It's actually the result of the merger of a number of different law firms across the country. And so there were, smaller firms in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver that all decided to get together and merge and create a national firm. And only in 2001 did BLG get its name, Borden Ladner Gervais. So we, as a firm, have about 750 plus lawyers, intellectual property agents, and other professionals in the 5 major cities in Canada. Our new branding as of this year is Canada's Law Firm. So, we're trying to position ourselves as being the go-to law firm for any business to be done in Canada. And that's obviously attracting an international clientele, which you can see here. We represent clients all over the world. And in fact, in my particular practice, I more often represent clients from other countries than I do clients within Canada. For example, I often represent, Chinese companies, French companies, UK companies, American companies that are looking to do business in Canada and expand in Canada. And so that's the kind of workflow that I get. And then, we also have a variety of different specialties and kind of initiatives that the firm has, whether it be with respect to startups. So we have our Startup and Grow platform. We have what we call a National Leasing Center, which deals, uniquely and specifically in commercial leases. And, obviously it's quite a big business. And so that's where we'll eventually start talking about the business side and the entrepreneurship side of law. Here's kind of an example of some of the clients that we have. I'm sure you can recognize quite a few of them. And these are, and I think it's also important to note that there's also this preconceived notion that, for example, Bell is our client. Well, these are not exclusive kind of clients, right? So oftentimes companies, all the companies you see here, I would say 99% of them most likely deal with other law firms as well. So there's no such thing as a company dealing exclusively with one firm. Because we have such a variety of practice areas, naturally it's almost impossible to be the best in every single practice area. It just doesn't happen. So oftentimes companies, what they'll do is they'll for different practice areas, for example, Bell, if it's looking to do M&A deals, which is transactional acquisition, it'll call us. But with respect to its leasing matters or other matters, they may call a different law firm. And it's the same goes with all of these different companies, is that we can represent Volkswagen in class action lawsuits, but we won't represent them for their labor and employment issues. And so I think that's something interesting for you guys to know.
Yeah, and we talked about coastal stage. You mentioned that you can apply to a lot of firms. So those are some of the big law firms in Canada, aside from BLG, and they all have different practice areas, different focuses. And that's why during coastal stage, as students, you have to kind of get to know them, get to know what you want to do, and if you see yourself in those firms, because different firms have different cultures. And I think one of the analogies that one of my friends told me that was really interesting during coastal stage was like, different firms are like the houses in Harry Potter, where they have different personality and different focuses. There's more firms than the number of houses, so there's even more personalities there. So that's what's interesting, I guess, to find where you fit best.
Yeah, and every, as Qian mentioned, like every firm has different focuses, right? And so, for example, like if I name a couple on the slide, like Stikeman Elliott or Osler or Blake's, those are very business law focused. So the crux of their workflow and their expertise is on transactional work, commercial work. So they're less recognized for litigation, arbitration, and stuff like that. Whereas some of the other firms listed here are, have a focus more on litigation. So it's like any industry, there's different sources of, clients and business. And so you have to play to your strengths and know what you're good in and know what you want to grow in. So now we'll talk about the business side of law. So first of all, internally within the firm, here are some of the roles, here are the primary roles that you would have within a firm, and most firms are structured the exact same way. I would say, so I'll get there in a second, but so Qian, a summer student who will be passing the bar?
I'll be passing the bar in January.
Okay. So Qian is still in law school. She got an offer here to do her stage, but before doing her stage, she has the opportunity to work as a summer student, which is what she's doing now. Then she will go back to school to finish her, I guess, or maybe you finish, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. You're going to graduate law school. You're going to go to bar school, become a lawyer. Once you become a lawyer, you become a junior associate. Then you, after about 3 years of practice, you become a mid-level associate. And then after 5 years of practice, you become a senior associate. And then you're eligible for partnership. Now, you become eligible at BLG, and this varies amongst the firms. Every firm have different timelines, but here you're eligible after your 7th year. So as of your 7th year, you can apply for partnership, and if you are accepted as a partner, you become what's called a non-equity partner, which basically means you're still an employee. So maybe I'll take another step back. Law firms, for the most part, are set up as partnerships. Okay, partnerships are different than corporations. Okay, corporations have their own kind of personality and can act in their own name. and there are shareholders of a corporation. I'm trying to simplify this as much as I can. Partnerships, on the other hand, are made up of different partners, and individuals are the partners to the partnership. And so in the case of BLG, there's what's called the equity partners. And the equity partners means that they've actually bought into the partnership. And so the equivalent is owning shares in a corporation, okay? So that would be the equity partners. Non-equity partners do not own shares in BLG. They are still considered employees. They have an employment contract, and they have kind of the title of a partner without being an actual partner of the partnership. After 2 years of being a non-equity partner, you're eligible to equity partnership, and eventually, once you retire, there's a forced retirement at the age of 65 from the partnership. So as soon as you turn 65, you are forced to step down as an equity partner of the firm, and you can then become a counsel, or you can simply retire. The other roles are paralegals, legal assistants, and law clerks. Those are different career paths. Those take I think it's called technical certifications, and those are different, like I said, different paths. But those are also positions available within the firm. And then you have a number of other roles within a firm as well, and we call them supporting roles. You have business development, so that's a team focused purely on business development and client development. They are responsible for preparing various pitches that we do to clients. They are responsible also for marketing materials and putting together bios of lawyers and stuff like that. They also do analysis of the market, and they basically, there's actually a full team that all they do is look for new opportunities in the legal space. There's the talent development and recruitment team. That is both recruitment at the student level, but also recruitment at the lawyer and partnership level. So not only do we recruit students from law school, but we also recruit from other law firms and other lawyers that are in-house. And so that's all under one team. And then talent development is the same team, but that focuses on the talent development of the lawyers at the firm. And so we have this, training program that BLG offers, and we have this thing called BLGU, which is our BLG University, and basically it's a whole database full of content in the various different practice areas and specialties. And another thing to mention is, as a lawyer, you are required to do what's called continuing legal education, and so you need to do a minimum of 35 hours every 2 years, I believe. And so you need to complete 35 hours of training every 2 years to keep your designation as a lawyer. Then we have our marketing and social media team that's responsible for our LinkedIn, our Facebook profiles, our Instagram, and all of that. Then we have our accounting departments, our collections departments, our mailroom staff, our kitchen staff. So I guess the idea is, like any other business, law firms are a business, and we're, in the case of BLG, quite a large one at that. We have a few thousand employees across the country, and so like any other business, we need all of these supportive roles, and there's a variety of different roles within the firm that, allow us to run and function as a business. So what are some of the kind of activities within the firm that typically a lawyer would have to focus on? So I guess the business model of a firm traditionally has always been the same, is that we are in the business of selling legal services, okay? So we sell legal services, and it's typically billed out in what's called a billable hour. I think this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. We bill by the hour. In my case, I bill $385 an hour. And so we have, as a lawyer, you have targets within the firm. In my case at BLG, I have a target of 1,700 billable hours a year, which comes to about 145 hours a month. And you also have a 200 non-billable target a year, and that includes your business development, your training, your community involvement. All of that goes within your 200 non-billable hour target. And then there's a whole bunch of other initiatives that you can focus on, to develop your own network and to, build the BLG brand and do your part in letting the firm grow and succeed. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's also the CLE training, which is mandatory and you have to complete every 2 years. And so now we're going to get into more of the business side of law, okay? So as I mentioned, we're in the business of selling legal services. So, to keep it as simple as possible, you basically have two types of businesses. You have businesses that sell goods and you have businesses that sell services. We happen to be a business that sells a service, and it happens to be of legal nature. And the only difference between us and other types of service businesses is that, there's certifications and qualifications you need in order to provide those services, similar as there would be to engineers and accountants and the like. So the business side of law is when you're starting off your career as a lawyer, as an associate, a junior associate, a mid-level associate, your primary goal is to achieve your billable hours. Okay, you come into the firm and you're basically working on existing clients that are the responsibility of existing partners, and you're tasked on different mandates and you're asked to work on a variety of existing files. So the business development side of things is not necessarily of concern for the first few years. The goal in your first few years of practice is to really get a sense of what the legal practice is like, really work on your skills and develop those skills and try to become the best lawyer you can be and be as knowledgeable as possible. As you progress in your career as a lawyer, you start to, and this is not for everyone. I think that's important to mention as well, is that there are a number of lawyers that are happy and content to simply be a practicing lawyer and not ever have to worry about business development and bringing in new clients, okay? So there are a number of people at the firm that they just want to come in, they want to do their work, they want to provide their legal services and their expertise to clients, and they want to go home and to their wife and kids or whatever. And so the path to partnership is not necessarily for them, and it's not for everyone. For those who are interested in partnership and who are interested in business development and the business side of law, the path to partnership involves business development, and it involves demonstrating your ability to develop clients. Now, you ask yourself, how do you develop clients? There's no magic recipe. There's no, secret sauce for you to follow. Everybody has their own way of doing it, and there's a variety of different ways. And here are just some examples on this slide of things you can do to try to develop business. And so, social events are important. Keeping contact in your personal network. Being in touch with, like for example, in my case, and my high school alumni. My high school happens to have a very strong alumni program where, all of the students that attended the school, there's annual gatherings, there's platforms there that, that allow individuals to get together that all went to the school and share that kind of common background. And so, that's a big one for me, and I try to be as involved as possible in the alumni association. But everybody has a different way. And so, cocktails, networking events. Actually, secondment is an interesting one, which you're probably not familiar with. Secondment is basically when so the firm like BLG has a number of large clients, and it's important to also notice, like clients like Bell, National Bank, BMO, all of these are also large scale businesses that they themselves have internal legal departments. So each one of these companies has a legal department comprised of, it can be a large number of lawyers. Like in the case of Bell, I think they have, probably close to 100 lawyers working internally at Bell. And so for a number of these companies, they almost have legal practices that are larger than a number of firms out there. And so I think the biggest distinction between them and a law firm is that they cater solely to their business, right? Whereas a law firm caters to a variety of different businesses. And so they often will reach out to a law firm like us when they're dealing in kind of unknown territory, or when things are, more complex than their internal teams are used to. And so what a secondment is it's basically when the law firm decides to send one of its lawyers to work on site for one of its clients. So for example, I have a colleague right now who's on secondment, and so she's an employee of BLG, she's a lawyer at BLG, but she's currently working at Bell with the Bell legal team. And so there's always a number of opportunities that arise for this, and it often happens when, for example, Bell has one of their lawyers go on maternity leave. And so one of their lawyers leaves for a year, and rather than going to hire somebody externally to fill a gap for a year, they'll call us up and they'll say, hey, is there anybody that you can send to us for, 6 months to kind of fill the gap and fill the void? And so we're happy to do that because it develops a relationship with the client like Bell, and it hopefully develops a relationship that will last years to come, right? And we'll send someone relatively more junior as opposed to a partner, and so as they grow alongside the Bell legal team, it hopefully allows us to secure work, down the line. So that's an extremely important one that most large firms follow with all of their major clients. Then there's a number of associations that you can, take part in. CVCA is the Canadian Venture Capital Association. The IBA is the International Bar Association, and that's basically gatherings of lawyers from across the world and across different countries that often get together every year, and they exchange ideas and developments in different, legal industries and practices across the world. And, you can't discount how important it is to have those referral sources from other countries, because as I mentioned to you earlier, in my particular practice area, that's extremely important because the clientele that we have often comes from, outside of the country. And so having referral sources from outside the country is extremely important. And, these are just some examples, but there's a number of different ones. And then there's certain practice areas where, business development takes the form of presentations and articles and different types of materials that are published to existing and potential clients in order to showcase, our expertise, whether it be in cannabis law or in privacy law. And so some of these areas of practice are still relatively new and kind of in their version of a startup phase. And so, I think privacy is a great example that we at BLG have one of the most, recognized privacy practices in the country. And so a number of clients come seek us out specifically for privacy matters because we are the recognized experts in the field. And so that's another way of developing, of doing business development, is through your expertise specifically, and not just through kind of social connections or your personal networks or other types of connections. I think something to be mentioned that, most people don't know is that another place where Quebec, I think, significantly differs from the rest of Canada is that business in Quebec is still very much done through personal connection, as opposed to the rest of Canada where it's done on an expertise basis. And so obviously there's no like kind of rule of thumb, and this doesn't apply to everybody. But often in Quebec, you will see business being transacted on the basis of personal relationships. So you will get clients because of who you know, right? And the relationships that you've built, as opposed to getting clients because you're the best or arguably the best in a specific field. And so I think that makes business development in Quebec a little different than it would elsewhere, in that we might focus more on the, personal networks and social events and just kind of getting out there and promoting the brand and promoting yourself as a lawyer. And then another very interesting source of business is other law firms. People don't realize that as much as law firms are competitors and we often compete for the same kind of piece of the pie, other law firms are also a great source of business generation, because another thing that makes the legal industry quite unique is that we, as lawyers and law firms, are often prevented from taking on certain types of clients for conflict of interest. And I'm sure you've heard this many times, but conflict of interest is something that is taken very seriously in law firms. And there's distinctions to be made between legal conflict of interest, which are conflict of interest that as a legal professional, you are not allowed to represent the interests of a client if they oppose the interests of another existing client. And so those are all governed by the kind of rules and ethical guidelines of the Quebec bar. But then you also have what's called business conflict of interest. And though sometimes in a particular situation, and I think if I were to use an example, let's say a friend of mine's father is the CEO of a company in Quebec. And as a CEO, he is having issues with the board of directors, and they want to terminate him and let him go. So in negotiating his kind of package, his exit package with the company, he would often want to retain a lawyer to help him negotiate that package. Now, because it's happened to me before where the friend of mine will call me and say, hey, can you take on this case and this file for my father? He's going through a kind of litigious matter with his company and he needs representation. Now, even though, from a legal conflict of interest perspective, assuming I don't already represent, or BLG does not already represent the company, let's call ABC Inc. If BLG does not represent ABC Inc., there's no legal conflict of interest for me to take on his file. That being said, we would say, internally that that's a business conflict of interest, because rather than looking to represent him individually in this one, matter, we would be interested in the long-term kind of benefits of representing ABC Inc., the employer, because, from a revenue generation and business development perspective, it's more profitable for us as a law firm to represent the company and not the employee. So oftentimes we will turn down that type of mandate so that we don't put ourselves in a future conflict if ever ABC Inc. calls us and wants us to help them for whatever matter that it is. And so that's what's called a business conflict of interest. And all of this, back to what I was saying about, other law firms being great sources of client referrals is that when other law firms are placed in conflicts of interest that do not allow them to take on a particular client or a particular file, they will then refer those to their contacts in other firms. And so that's why it's extremely important for you to, as a lawyer, to keep your contacts and your friends in other law firms close, because you will often refer each other business down the line. And it can actually turn into quite a profitable and lucrative kind of relationship. And so there's a bit of that exchange between, colleagues. And I personally try to keep in touch with all of my law school friends who are now working at other law firms. And I make sure to check in and obviously try to maintain that network, because that's hopefully going to pay off down the line. Where the next slide is. So just to keep going on the business development side. So as I mentioned, when you're starting off your career as a lawyer, as much as the firm, wants you to focus on the technical legal skills and developing your skills as a lawyer, some firms also recognize the importance of the younger lawyers in the future development of the firm and in the growth of the firm from a client development perspective. And so I think BLG is an example of one of those firms which has a very entrepreneurial mindset, in that we as a firm highly encourage our associates to develop their networks and develop clients and bring in business. And so, the ways that they do that is by giving you budgets. So we have client development, business development budgets. In my case, it's, they basically give us like $5,000 a year to take various contacts out to lunches and dinners and social events and hockey games and kind of whatever we want, in the hopes of building our own networks and eventually bringing in business. And obviously, it's up to you to use your judgment and how to do that, but there's a great amount of flexibility in doing that. And then, I think it's something else that makes us different than other firms is that as a junior lawyer, you're actually allowed to bring in your own clients. And so if a friend of mine has a company or himself has a legal matter and needs, a lawyer, then he can give me a call and I can actually take on that new client. And so I myself have a few clients that I've managed to kind of bring into the firm over the last few years, in a variety of different areas. And I think what's also really cool about working in a firm like this is that the clients you bring in don't necessarily have to be clients looking for services in which you practice. So for example, if I use one of my clients as an example, I have a friend of mine who started a business. And he manufactures a variety of food products. And one of his main products is called PB&Me, and it's this powdered peanut butter kind of supplement that they sell in a variety of grocery stores, and they sell it at Costco, and he sells it all over, and he's doing very well. And he last year was approached by the Food and Drug, the Food and Drug Administration of Canada, for labeling issues that he was having on his product. And so they were basically auditing him and his business in terms of labeling content and the accuracy of his nutritional information. And so he called me and he said, hey, I got this letter and they're looking into me and I need some help in responding and whatnot. And so he called me because I guess I was, a good friend and a lawyer. But even though this has absolutely nothing to do with what I do as a lawyer, and this is not my expertise at all, I have colleagues at the firm that, that specialize in this particular industry. And so I was able to take him on as a client and have one of my colleagues assist him in the matter. And so this is, one of the great things about being in a large firm that has such a variety of expertise is that we can pretty much take on any type of client other than criminal or family. We don't really do family law and we don't do criminal law. So that's an example of, how I, as an associate, was able to take on my own client and try to generate revenue for the firm. And the idea being that as I grow within the firm and hopefully look to become a partner in the next few years, my clients grow at the same time to a level of kind of business where they're generating, a nice amount of revenue for me and BLG as a law firm. And so that's kind of the business side of law, which personally I have a great interest in, and I see myself gunning for partnership and hopefully becoming a partner one day. And as I mentioned, in order to do that, you have to demonstrate to the firm that you're able to develop business and you're able to have your own book of clients. And so you often hear this term where every partner has what they call a book of clients. And so it's the portfolio of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 clients that they might have that they brought to the firm or were responsible in kind of growing within the firm. And where the entrepreneurship side of law comes in is that every single one of these equity partners at the firm is essentially their own entrepreneur and standalone business. And so each one of them has the client relationship with the Bell Canadas, the Googles, the Apples, the Netflix. And so each one of these large clients that has come to the firm came through one of these partners, right? And so that's where you as a partner and an entrepreneur come in and try to grow the piece of the pie and try to make this business, which is now, BLG is a $500 million a year business, which keeps growing year over year over year. That's, how we as a business grow. And it's the only difference that, these are a bunch of the way I like to see it is a bunch of individual entrepreneurs that got together under one common banner in one firm and try to promote each of their respective expertise in order to offer the kind of largest range of expertise within the legal services industry.
Yeah, sorry
and then
to
you
interrupt
have
you. I just wanted to let you know. Yes, sorry. Sorry I didn't present myself. I'm Zexi. I'm a co-founder at the club. But I just wanted to let you know that we're currently 2 p.m. and we're planning to have, our talk maybe until 2:15. But we can obviously go over it, and that's totally okay. But we know you're really busy at your firm, and you might have other business to attend to. So I just wanted to let you know that we're currently 2, and maybe I'm not sure what time you wanted to end at, but maybe just
we're actually pretty much done. Maybe another 2 minutes, and then we were going to open it up to Q&A.
Okay, that sounds amazing.
I think timing-wise, we're on the ball.
All right, awesome. I just wanted to make sure, but great.
Yeah, thanks. No, I appreciate it, for sure. I actually lost track of time, so that's good. So just basically to finish up the presentation, the last slide, as Qian mentioned originally, you can go to law school and not necessarily become a lawyer. A law degree is, I would say, one of the most versatile degrees that you can get. And the skill set that you gain from getting a law degree is highly valued by a number of different businesses in a variety of different industries. And, I guess to keep it as simple as possible, every business has legal matters to tend to, right? Whether it be with respect to the leases that they lease for their premises, to the employees that they hire, to the regulatory compliance that they need for a variety of permits and certifications and whatever it is, for any litigious matters that they might be involved in. So any business in the world has kind of legal matters that they tend to, and so they're always welcome to having employees with legal backgrounds that understand how the system works, that understand the different issues, and who are able to navigate those issues. And so, I often tell, and we see it all the time, I have a number of friends that I was in law school with that have moved on to do completely different things for a variety of different businesses, whether it be pharmaceuticals or, you know, going to work for venture capital firms and private equity firms. There's just such a kind of wide, there's a lot of opportunity out there, I guess is the way to say it. And so becoming a lawyer after law school is definitely not the only thing that a law degree can lead you towards. And so I think that's also important to keep in mind as a student possibly exploring this as a career path. And so I think that pretty much wraps it up for the presentation. And so we're opening it up to Q&A if you guys have any questions for us.
Awesome. I just wanted to make sure, just so there's like an order, a certain order, so not everybody like talks at the same time. Probably just like leave your name in the chat beforehand. And you know, we're just gonna follow the order if that's okay with everyone.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Actually, you want to kick us off, or you want me to go? Just somebody leave the name. Okay, yeah, Zexy, you go.
Sure. I'll go ahead. Yeah. So we know like you know, you talked a lot about partnership and the structure within a firm. But we know that usually in a firm, it would be more of, let's say, like a pyramid structure. But it's really interesting that you brought up the concept of like partnerships and the fact that it's really based on like your experience within the firm that you get access to like such a role. But I just wanted to know, like, is there specifically someone who like gives the orders, or is it more of like a communal environment within the firm?
It's a great question. So I think it's quite unique in the sense, I would actually say that, you know, the hierarchy in a law firm is, I think, different than in most businesses. So it's not as vertical as you would imagine, right? In most businesses, variety of employees report to a specific, you know, has a boss, and then that boss has a boss, and it goes up the scale, and it goes up to, you know, regional director, and then national director, et cetera. In a law firm, I would say we actually have quite a flat structure. And so I'd like to think of it as like, I don't really have a boss. I have a number of people that I can report to, and those are the partners across the firm. And so obviously there's a hierarchy in terms of, you know, your status within the firm. And so obviously a partner would outrank an associate, right? But you don't necessarily report to anybody. And so you're very independent as a lawyer to manage your own affairs and work on your own type, you know, your own files, and work on and kind of navigate your career. And so, you know, to give you a sense of how it works for me, and I would say for most people, in my group, okay, in the Montreal office, so let's just break it down. The Montreal office of BLG has about 150 lawyers, okay? And we have 4 different floors downtown in an office building. And so, as I mentioned, there's a variety of different practice areas. So in my group, it's called the corporate commercial group. And so in my corporate commercial group, we have about, I think, 35 lawyers that are in that group. And of those 35 lawyers, 20 of them are associates, 15 of them are partners, okay? And so if partner A brings in a new file, let's say Bell Canada calls and says to partner hey, hey, John, we have a new transaction where we're looking to acquire such and such a business. Can we get a team together to assist us in this file? So what the partner will do is he will set up a team that will work on that file. So he will call me and he'll say, hey, Jordan, are you interested in working on this new file with Bell? They're working on this transaction. And then, you know, he'll call Qian and say, hey, Qian, are you willing to work on this? And so we'll typically create a team of 2-3 lawyers on this one file, and they will work on that file. And so with respect to that file, you know, John might be kind of my supervising lawyer or my partner. But you're still very independent in that I have 5, 10 other files that are ongoing with other people. And so that's how the structure kind of works. Frankly, if I was able to generate enough hours for myself, I can almost work for myself. It's just the reality is that generating 1,700 hours for yourself is not an easy task to do as an associate. And so that's why you kind of tend to work with certain people. And so as much as, but that being said, I often have partners calling me and asking me if I want to work on their files, and I often refuse, not politely, but I often say like, oh, unfortunately right now I'm a little too busy or my plate's a little full, and I think it's best if you reach out to somebody else. And so in that sense, you don't really have a boss, right? In that, how often can you say no to your boss? And so that's, I guess, where the professional side of things comes in, is that you are treated as a lawyer and as a professional, no matter what your title is in the firm.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. Thank you, Mr. Furfaro. I think Ella has a question.
Yeah, so I have a question for both of you. Well, each 2 separate questions. But for Qian, did you find it beneficial going directly into law school? Because I've heard from various people because I'm interested in like following a similar path, and what I've heard from various people saying, oh, it's better if you do an undergrad first, and others saying, no, it's amazing. So what do you think?
I think for sure, like there's things you can learn in undergrad that you won't like get the chance to like if you go directly into law school. But at the same time, like I think going to law school when you're young, you get like more time to like to look. You can choose not to be a lawyer after law school. You can like explore more and then like pass the bar or do something else with your law degree. I think like why not? Like that was my thought when I first got into law school. I was like, why not? And like, I know, like, for example, there'll be a lot of people in your cohort who have different backgrounds, and like, why not learn from them directly? Unless you want like very like practical knowledge, where like if it's not something you can learn online or like to a lot of online courses that exist now, like if you want a certain type of knowledge, then for sure go to undergrad if it's something precise you want to learn. But if it's just general knowledge, I think you can learn a lot from the other people around you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it because that's what I was thinking. I've heard a lot of great things about applying directly into law school, so I'm happy that you affirmed that. You reassured me with that. And for Jordan, you mentioned finding places to get experience before your course of stage. How did you find these places, and was this during your first year that you were working at them?
So I actually got lucky in that I had a friend of mine who called me one day, and I think, so in my situation, my friend worked at a bank, TD Bank, and one of the clients of the bank was a lawyer, and he had his own practice, and he came in banking one day on, I think it was like a Saturday morning, and my friend was working as a customer service representative, and the client, the lawyer, knew that my friend was in law school and he was looking to hire. And so he asked my friend, hey, would you be interested in coming to work with me? And my friend at the time was not interested. He was happy with his job at the bank. So he says, no, I'm not interested, but I actually have a friend who might be. So he gave me a call and said, hey, I have this client. He wants to meet you. And it was actually really strange how it happened. He basically gave him my number. He called me. He says, hey, can you come in for an interview tomorrow on a Sunday? I said, sure. I came in for an interview. We spoke for about an hour and a half. And he said, hey, when can you start? And I said, tomorrow. And he said, no problem. So in my case, I guess I was kind of lucky. But from what I gather, I think most jobs happen like that. It's just through your network and whatnot. But there are also certain places and websites where you'll find job postings for summer student jobs. And I think if you're interested, one of them is called Droit Inc. It's probably the most popular one in Montreal, and that's where the entire legal kind of industry in Montreal, a lot of the news comes out on there, and there's a lot of job postings and a lot of interesting articles on what's happening at the various law firms, and so just, little caveat, it's a bit of a kind of like a blog, not a blog, but it's how would you characterize
it's
it?
like there's articles about different topics.
I mean, it's not, sometimes it's not the most professional platform, you know, it's not like the most reputable, but you could certainly find some good content on there.
What's it called? It's TWA?
No, droit, like law, but in French. Droit, D-R-O-I-T.
Oh, droit. Okay, sorry, I didn't.
Ash, yeah, no problem. Dash Inc.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
But also, like, another thing, like, I actually, like, it was through a contact that I got my first summer job too. And it was not a contact that would reach out to me directly. I was surfing through LinkedIn, and there was like a position at a firm called Stikeman Elliott. And that was like, I was really underqualified for, I knew it, I still applied. And then there was someone I met at a conference or at a cocktail that worked, a lawyer that worked at the firm at the time. And I just reached out to her like, oh, hi, I applied to this job. It would be really like nice if you can like refer me, or like if there's any position you know of within the firm, like feel free to like talk about me. And she actually did it. And that's how like I got my first job at a law firm in my first summer. So that was pretty fun too. So don't hesitate to like reach out to people that like you might enter for real.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. For both of you, was it during your first summer that you got the job?
Yeah. And I got it during my first summer, and then I continued working part-time throughout the school year. It was super flexible, so why not? And it was a good experience. In my case, it was a litigation firm, so it gave me an idea of, and I think that's, you know, I know Qian mentioned it earlier, but it's important to know that a large number of lawyers never go to court. Like, for example, in my case, I've never been in court. I don't even know what the inside of a courtroom looks like. And so that's just not, I mean, I do, because I've been as an articling student, but I mean, as a lawyer, I've never been. And so for me, it gave me an opportunity to see what litigation lawyers do, and how, you know, procedure and drafting and court documents and presenting in front of court. I got to experience all of that as a student, ultimately to decide that it wasn't really what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to go more into the contract drafting and negotiations and transactions. That's what I did.
Amazing, thank you. Next, Elizabeth, do you have a question?
Yep. So I was quite interested when you're talking about the differences in Quebec when learning law compared to other provinces or countries, and I was wondering your opinion on whether it is more advantageous to learn law in Quebec.
So I guess the first kind of question I'd ask myself is, if you want to work and live in Quebec, you have no choice but to learn civil law and to become a member of the Quebec Bar. So in order to do that, you definitely have to learn civil law. That being said, in certain practice areas, you can actually, in certain situations, like for example, in my case, I have a number of colleagues that studied common law, and so they actually did bar, they wrote the bar in various jurisdictions. So I have colleagues that have written the Quebec bar and that have also written the Ontario bar. I also have colleagues that have written the Quebec bar and written the New York bar or the California bar, because you can also do US bars as well, and there's certain equivalencies that apply. But ultimately, you know, if you want to live and work in Quebec, you absolutely need to do civil law. If you want to live and work in another city in the country, then you absolutely need to do common law. I think that's the simplest way to put it. But as I mentioned, there are equivalencies. So for example, if you want to go to law school in Toronto, you can go to, say, U of T or Osgood. You can do your law school in Toronto. You can write the Ontario bar, and then you can transfer to Quebec and write what's called the equivalency. So it's essentially a condensed version of the Quebec bar, which would allow you to become, authorized to practice in Quebec. And so that's why you see a number of lawyers that often have more than one bar, which allows them to practice in more than one jurisdiction.
Perfect, I see. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I think Zexi has a question.
Yeah, that's right. So I had actually two questions, but I wouldn't want to take much of your time. Do you
No
think you
problem.
have time for it?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. My first question was just like a continuation on Elsa's question, actually. I'm actually also looking into like international law. And you mentioned that, you know, you had a lot of international clients across the globe. Um, but let's say like if you do a degree in Quebec, how would you be able to deal with like these international clients or like practice across jurisdictions um, if you only have like a degree in Quebec? How would that work?
So I think it's okay. So I think it's important to note that the so there's always going to be a Quebec element. Okay, let me see how I can put this as simply. So let's say I don't know, Toyota, okay, who's
Okay.
whatever, a Japanese business. Actually, that's probably a bad example because they already do business in Canada. But imagine a company that doesn't do business in Canada. Okay, let's say a company that operates elsewhere in the world, but that has absolutely no business dealings in Canada and even less so in Quebec. Okay, if that company that manufactures, I don't know, styrofoam, wants to expand their business and now do business in Canada, they will necessarily need a Canadian lawyer, right? Because every country has its own laws and needs to. So what they'll do is they're going to call us, and it's not just me. It could be me. It can be I often also do dealings across the country, and even though I'm a Quebec lawyer, I often do transactions that are governed by the laws of other provinces. And I think that's one of the interesting things about being a corporate lawyer versus a litigation lawyer is like when you're a litigation lawyer, you can only represent clients in front of the courts of Quebec. Whereas when you're a corporate lawyer, you can represent clients in other jurisdictions as well. There's nuances, but we won't go too deep into that. But all this to say that this international company who wants to do business will call me and say, hey, I want to start selling my styrofoam products in Canada. What do I need to do? And then that's where, it's our job to set them up, to incorporate a new subsidiary in Canada, to, walk them through all the steps on what it takes to operate a business here, to hire employees here, to get a premises here, rent space, etc. And so that's kind of the international component that we deal with. But the opposite is true as well. We often have Canadian clients, existing clients of ours that are looking to expand in Europe and expand in Asia. And so that's why we have relationships with lawyers across the globe in various jurisdictions that we will work with hand in hand. So it's very common that I work with lawyers in other countries on the same files. So let's say, my client, Lightspeed, okay? I don't know if you guys have heard of Lightspeed, but Lightspeed is a Montreal-based company that, started in Montreal, but that has expanded across the world, across in a number of different countries in the world. And so they will, us as their lawyers in Canada and their first kind of line of legal counsel, they'll call us and they'll say, hey, we're looking to expand in Switzerland. And so it'll be our job to, reach out to our contacts in Switzerland and get a legal team there to coordinate with us. And we work together to get that client set up over there. And so, that happens very routinely where I work with various legal teams across various countries.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I hope I answered your question.
yeah, it makes sense. Totally makes sense. Thanks a lot for that, Mr. Furfaro. And
No problem.
if no one else has any question, I think it would be a good way to close it. Because right now I want to turn a bit more in the entrepreneurship field. So just to close up, so we know corporate lawyers as being as dealing with like big cash inflows, and it involves like transactions, M&As, and whatnot. But the reality is also that you often work with those smaller firms or startups. And if I'm not mistaken, what are the various ways you help entrepreneurs who are just starting? What are different ways that you make them succeed in their projects? And I'm opening that question to like both of you. And yeah.
It's a great question.
Thank you.
I think, honestly, I think the only distinction between the two types of clients you're talking about is the stage in which they are currently in as a business, right? I mean, yes, we represent the Bells and the Apples and the Googles and the whatever. But at one point in time, they were also startups. And so, you know,
Yeah.
the paths are the same for every business. And the way we help startups is obviously, I think the most important thing for startups is conserving cash and trying to minimize as many as expenses as possible. And so often startups, you know, are weary of approaching larger law firms like BLG because our rates are significantly higher than, you know, an individual lawyer practicing on his own. But we do have certain programs where we have fixed fee arrangements for startups, where we cap, you know, our fees for certain, or we'll have packages where we'll often, you know, offer our services, let's say like a bundle of hours. So think of it as kind of like a cell phone plan. Like you can say, you know, for $5,000, we're willing to give you 20 hours of legal services or, you know, of any member of our firm. And so I guess, you know, the only distinction, not only from a monetary perspective, but also, you know, the questions that a startup would have would be a lot more in terms of structuring how they're going to go about doing business, as opposed to, you know, having more complex legal issues. For them, it's more about, you know, how do I incorporate a company? Which jurisdiction do I incorporate the company in? You know, do I incorporate under the laws of Quebec, under the laws of Canada? You know, how do I file my taxes? How do I, you know, what do I do if I want to hire employees? So the questions are a lot more, I don't want to say elementary, but like, I guess for us, the only distinction is, you know, the business cycle in which they're in and the growth phase that they're in. But as a law firm, and I think, you know, you're right that it is a very entrepreneurial question, because there are a lot of large law firms that don't want anything to do with startups because startups can't afford to pay their bills. Okay? That's a mindset, and that's a business development strategy. You know, for some firms, they just want to charge their hourly rate. They want to charge their $750 an hour, and they want clients who are able to pay $750 an hour. BLG, we're more entrepreneurial. We are more willing to invest in our clients and take a risk in the hopes that these clients, who's a startup today with 2 employees, will eventually become a company in 10 years from now with 500 employees. And so that's just our business development strategy. And for us, we're willing to take, you know, a loss on our fees today in the hopes that in 10 years, it'll generate a lot more revenue down the line. And so like any business, it's just a different growth strategy. So for us, we have the flexibility of doing that. And so that's why a lot of my clients are startups, and a lot of my clients are small companies with a handful of employees.
Okay.
There's also a lot of like partners involved in like non-for-profit organizations.
Yes.
Like they will give their like.
There's also pro bono, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's also pro bono, where a lot of firms have pro bono where we'll do things for free. And so that's all part of, you know, branding and our, you know, contribution to the community, and like any business, you want to be perceived as being, you know, in tune with the values of society. And so those are some of the things that we do.
Okay, that's really interesting. Talking about, you know, it opened my eyes to like law firms actually investing in like the small companies and see them grow. But thank you, Mr. Furfaro and my son.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you both for taking the time today to speak to us. We really appreciate the presentation you put together. It was extremely interesting, and we're already getting feedback from our members that they loved it. So thank you so much. And yeah, we really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. And if ever there's any other questions or anything, you have my contact information. I think for those of you out there, if you ever have any questions, feel free to drop us an email or your phone call. We'd be happy to help. We're here to answer all your questions, and good luck in your future endeavors to all of you. And hopefully some of you will choose to go down the legal career path. It's honestly, it's a great career path. It's, it's highly respected and
fun. Yeah.
it's fun. Honestly, we have a good time. It's and I think it's important to be part of a great team. And I'd like to think at BLG we have a great team here. So
from the sounds,
we're happy.
Absolutely. I'm happy. So.
Yeah.
Well, before we let you go, we're just going to disconnect from the live stream. And